Last week we spoke about the mind and its nature, what kind of thing a mind is, whether it's physical or something distinct from anything physical. We also considered various computational or computer-inspired approaches to mentality. This week I want to focus on the question of the mind's knowledge of itself, that is, what self-knowledge is and what value it might have for us. Insofar as we're doing that, we'll be combining the discussion we had a couple weeks ago about the nature of knowledge with the discussion we had most recently about the nature of the mind. Now, as a way into the topic of self-knowledge, I want to go back to Plato and his description of Socrates when he was on trial, and the text we'll be focusing on for these purposes will be the text known as the Apology. Socrates is now defending himself against a charge that has been brought against him in a trial in the style of ancient Athens. Now, this dialogue is called the Apology, but Socrates is not apologizing for anything. What he's doing is explaining himself, justifying his lifestyle in response to the accusation that has been brought. So he's now 70 years old. It is now 399 BC. And Socrates is on trial for charges such as the following. Here are some of the charges that have been brought up against him. People have said that he makes the worse argument the stronger. That is, arguments that seem like they should be weak. Socrates seems to have a magical way of making them seem more powerful than they deserve to be. That was number one. Number two, he busies himself studying things in the sky and the earth, was one of the other charges, that somehow Socrates doesn't spend his time doing useful things like making pots or arrows, training to be a soldier, or building ships, or farming food, raising food on a farm, but rather he just studies things. He uses his mind all day long in the sky and the earth, and that seems somehow idle, I guess, is what the charge was. And then the next charge was he teaches these same things to others, and in the process corrupts people, especially the youth of our city. Socrates, because he had developed a reputation as someone who'd go to other fellow Athenians and ask them questions about justice and virtue and knowledge and truth, would often show that their answers to his questions were less valid, less worthwhile, less insightful than their holders thought, would often show those people up as being somehow buffoons or confused or overconfident about their own knowledge. And Socrates would often embarrass these people in front of others, even if he didn't do so intentionally. You can see how he would develop a trail of people who felt a little bit resentful towards him. And in the process, he acquired a sort of entourage of generally aristocratic young Athenian men who were fascinated by the conversations that he would have with others and hope to learn from him, as well as to see other people, other Athenians, shown that they don't know as much as they seem to know. And Socrates says, that's the charge, and if I actually had knowledge, if I, for example, thought I knew things more than other people, then I'd be, he says, I would pride and preen myself if I had this knowledge. But I don't have this knowledge. I don't have any more knowledge than any of you. In fact, I might even be more ignorant. And Socrates goes on to tell the story of the time that he and his friend Chaerephon went to the oracle at Delphi. The oracle at Delphi is an legendary entity in Greece, in the mountains. You can still go visit it even now. And in ancient Greece, it was a place where priests and priestesses would inhabit a special temple. And according to recent archaeological excavations, we found that there was a crevice at that point in the mountainside over which the temple was built, and occasionally some noxious gas would come out from under that crevice. Apparently, the female priestess, the Pythian, as the term for her goes, would inhale some of that noxious gas and, I guess, get into an altered state, and then proceed to answer a question that was posed for her by a seeker. So in one famous example, this might be a legend. In one example, a general came up to the oracle at Delphi and said he was considering attacking another army, another general's army, and he said, should I go to war against this other general? And the oracle said, if you attack this other army, then a great victory will be had. And then the general was delighted with the news, ran down the mountain, got his troops into battle, went to battle, and was soundly defeated by the other army. Now notice the oracle was right. a great victory was had, but it was just a different victory from the one that the general expected to have. So, according to legend, the oracle was always right, was incapable of being mistaken, but would often speak in mysterious ways, in cryptic ways, and the listener, the seeker, would have to work hard to make sure that they were understanding precisely what words were uttered so that they were not misled. So, Socrates says he and his friend Chaerephon went up to the oracle at Delphi, and his friend said to the oracle, "Is anyone wiser than Socrates?" And the answer that they were given in return was, "No, no one is wiser than Socrates." Now, Socrates goes on and says, "I was astonished by this answer. I couldn't believe my ears. I thought that it was amazing. But as we understand what the oracle said and Socrates' interpretation of it, let's ask ourselves precisely what it means to say no one is wiser than Socrates. That does not mean that Socrates is the wisest person in Athens. For example, consider the sentence, no one is taller than George. In the room, suppose we've got a room full of people and somebody says, no one is taller than George. That does not mean that George is the tallest one in the room, of course, simply because George might be the same height as everybody else in the room. Everybody in the room might be exactly 5 feet, 5 and 7 inches tall, just like George, and still it's true that no one is taller than George. So likewise, the fact that no one is wiser than Socrates might just be because, for example, every Athenian is equally ignorant, including Socrates, therefore no one is wiser than he is.